Okay, we are live. Great. So what has happened now is that I've continued reading the On War tome by Carl von Clausewitz. We are still in book number 1, which is about what is war, or rather, that's chapter 1. But the two sections I've been reading is about modifications in reality, which means basically how the theory transfers into practice, and then that war is never an isolated act. And my idea here is once again to turn this into more of a business perspective. And surprisingly enough, or perhaps I shouldn't say surprisingly enough, there once again is a very good practical bridge from like a war theme to more of a business perspective. And what you're seeing here is my Zoom whiteboard where I've sort of drawn up the main points of these readings so it's easier for you to follow along. And the general theme here is basically how is like warfare in abstract theory and how it differs from like the in practice application. And you see these two boxes here. We have like the abstract theory box, and then we have the situation in practice box. And this is my own addition here. Strategy in theory would be here on the left side, and strategy in practice would be here on the right side. And the main point that Clausewitz points out here is that, which is my own conclusion, is that there is this thing called the abstraction trap. And what Clausewitz, he never said the abstraction trap, that's like my own addition, but Clausewitz is talking here that when we think about warfare in the abstract, then that sort of makes a bunch of like far-flung assumptions about how things will go on when you put things in the extreme on paper. In his mind, like abstraction is like super optimistic, and it sort of always moves towards like a clear, defined end solution goals. And then at the end, then he asks, like, is the war ever an isolated event that just happens suddenly with no connection to other situations or like states as a whole? And the answer is obviously no. There are other things that affect like wars. And in the same way, in the business world, there are other things outside the business that influence the business. So we can't just make the business succeed by doing like this theoretical strategic exercise. And we can't assume that just because we have a perfect strategic theory on paper that's how things are going to work in reality. Of course not. I mean, things are bound to change, and when they change, then they're basically going to destroy our nice little plan that we spent so much time and care working on. And then Clausewitz also asked, like, is the war made up by a single decisive event or like a multiple decisive events? And here he also implies that no, that's actually not the case, because war is not just like the war in itself. War doesn't like exist in its own reality. Instead, it acts with the environment, and it's the same with our strategy. Like the business doesn't exist in a vacuum, and our customers don't exist like in an isolated environment. No. Everything keeps happening in interaction with everything else. So that's why we can't either assume that success in a strategic sense in the business world is dependent on us just executing our theoretical plan. Because like if there's a recession going on, or the stock market crashes, or like prices or customer preferences change, then our little neat plan, if it's not adapted to that, won't work. So even if we have an idea, then we still need to take in input from the environment and adapt accordingly. Or well, if you can ignore that and do something else, but don't expect things to work out as you wanted. And then of course, the last point that Clausewitz makes is that the war itself is not the single deciding outcome of how the war ends. Like when you reach a peace settlement, there's always some other things that influence it and how the peace settlement is done and what is written. It's not only the war in itself, because things like long-term consequences of a settlement need to be taken into account. It could also be the same in a business sense. For example, the business could be doing something according to a strategy, but there are also things like investor preferences, the preference of the owner, CEOs, and the environment, legislation, and things like that, which also basically stakeholders who have an interest in the business, and the business needs to take that into account. So just because something could be done and you do something doesn't necessarily determine the ultimate outcome, because when a significant stakeholder gives input and desires something, then the business is forced to take that too into account. And that's the environment in a nutshell. So in a way, this is still relevant to this day, which is pretty great, quite interesting in a way. And then on the flip side, towards the end of these two sections, Clausewitz talks about the situation in practice, and I naturally turn that into strategy in practice. And that's the really application part. And what Clausewitz points out that the practical situation has like a dampening effect on like the theoretical abstract framework. Like even though things would look really clear and have like an optimal outcome on paper, the situation, how it looks like in reality, could like affect that it's not actually possible to reach the perfect outcome that you drafted out. Instead, like you're going to get something else that's slightly in that direction. And it's the same in the business. I mean, we could write down that, hey, we want to open up one factory in each country on earth, and there's this perfect plan how we're going to do it. But then reality sets in, and the practical situation doesn't basically allow us to execute this perfect plan. Or let's say a recession sets in, and all of a sudden stuff just can't be sold because people are not buying, or a competitor comes out with something new that just changes the environment. And that's really the big takeaway here. It's also the same in strategy. Like you want to do this, but then the situation is dampened. So that's really the big takeaway from Clausewitz from these two sections. There's this optimal theoretical abstract world where we move in extremes and like optimal outcomes, and then the practical reality looks like not as perfect, and it basically prevents us from perfectly executing our great little plan. So that's all for today. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and let's dive deeper into this. And if you found this recording video interesting, make sure to drop a like and subscribe, either here on YouTube if you see it there, or follow me on LinkedIn or Facebook, because this is where I'll be posting these insights. And let me know what you think. That was all for today. I'll be speaking to you soon once again when we continue on with von Clausewitz onward. Take care and speak to you soon once again.